For more than a decade, residents have fought periodic battles with Forestry SA over the use of burn-offs to clear waste wood and unsaleable logs from the state's forests. Now, a recent burn-off has reignited the controversy, with the Greens arguing that the practice compromises the health of the residents and the environment. Forestry SA insists it's playing a leading role in reducing greenhouse gases. Simon Raw's been looking at both sides of the argument.
This is what we complain about in Indonesia and the Philippines and South America. It's just slash and burn technology with all the filth that goes with it.
Setting fire to stockpiles of logs and branches and twigs and all the rest of it is adding to greenhouse pollution.
Use of fire is a very important tool in forest management. You cut a lettuce leaf and it starts to release carbon. I mean, that's a natural way of things.
Colin Rogers has lived around Kaipo Forest for 25 years. He says for as long as he can remember, Forestry SA has burnt off so-called waste wood, most recently just a couple of weeks ago. And that sparked yet again debate over the effects.
This is what happens every time they fell timber in the Kaipo Forest. They push together what they call their surplus timber into huge piles. These are about 2 metres tall, and they torch it. And it burns for 2 or 3 days, lots of smoke, flames, smoke drifting over the road, smoke affecting everyone else around the place.
It's bad for your health. Everywhere they've examined particulate pollution and health, it's bad for you. In terms of greenhouse, what we've got in these trees is vast amounts of carbon, and when we burn them, whether it's the branches, the trunks, whatever, we release that carbon to the atmosphere. That's greenhouse pollution. That's bad for the climate globally.
Overall, we are substantially greenhouse positive. And overall, the state is greenhouse positive because the records would show that as a function of all the eucalypt plantations, for example, established in the lower southeast, the state actually has a very good greenhouse gas credit record.
Forestry SA defines the wood it burns off as residues. It's stuff left over from logging, but the bulk is logs that there is no market for. For years, Colin Rogers has lobbied to have burn-off stopped. This is video he says he shot 10 years ago. So, when the latest burn-off happened, Colin Rogers says he approached the authorities again.
I immediately contacted, as I've always done, the EPA and the Minister of Environment's office. They put me on to the Minister of Ag's office, and his response is that this is what they do, and it's been done for hundreds of years and they don't intend to change.
But Forestry SA insists things have changed. Burn-offs occur less frequently and rarely ever in the southeast forests.
We've considerably reduced the amount of burning that we've been doing in the last 5 or 6 years.
In opposition, Labor demanded the former Liberal government seek better ways of managing unwanted wood. The current minister declined to be interviewed, saying Forestry SA is the independent management body. But are there other options for dealing with unwanted wood? The answer is yes, but there's not necessarily agreement on what's best. Professor Barry Brook is an environmental scientist at the University of Adelaide. His particular interest is climate change. The best greenhouse solution, he says, would be using the wood for other purposes, even mulch, thus keeping carbon out of the atmosphere for longer. But if the wood is to be burnt, the scientist argues there must be some benefit, remembering that wood, after all, was the Industrial Revolution's original power plant.
It sounds crazy, but there are wood-fired power stations around, and of course back in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, before we got serious about coal, most of the early part of that coke creation was to make charcoal, was from wood, and it was for iron smelting and so on. Throughout most of history, that's what we've done.
I would love a wood-fired power station. It'd be the answer to our prayers. But the problem about a wood-fired power station is the cost of materials that go in, the capital cost of a power station, and can you do it profitably?
Well, at first blush, that looks to be a good idea. You know, you'll see this massive pile of timber and thinking, gee, we could create some electricity from that. The problem, of course, is that you then create an industry that depends on having this feedstock, that it's going to require vast quantities. You don't build a power station, use a few piles of timber and then close it down.
Barry Brook says there are other more greenhouse-friendly solutions as well, such as a process called pyrolysis, where the wood is burnt with very little oxygen, creating charcoal.
One of the proposals is to bury it. And if you bury that carbon and mix it into soils, and it can help aerate soils, it can help them retain water and mineral nutrients, and it locks the carbon up, potentially for anywhere up to thousands of years.
It's called biochar, and again the Greens are not so sure about it. Forestry SA argues for either a power station or biochar to be economically viable, the nation needs a carbon tax. But what of the root cause, which is why is South Australia apparently growing trees that no one wants?
The biggest problem to start with is the fact that this material exists as waste at all. And that's a failure of the market, and it's a failure of our forest industry to get it right.
We're currently working on about 3 different scenarios potentially for the sale of this wood, and if they are successful, this would help us considerably in terms of reducing our need to burn waste material.
In the end, the use of burn-offs is unlikely to cease, but then again, it's not likely to stop being an issue either.
I get really annoyed when you hear the politicians jumping up and down about how wonderful the power plant in North Terrace is. You know, they put hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of solar cells up there, and the emissions that they say by doing that is totally cancelled by the Forestry SA doing this sort of burn-off.